Eric, thank you for taking the time. Core focus of the event this year is discussing the trends for the next decade, and really the trends that going to inspire the next generation of founders, right? That's really what we're focused on here. Now, in the set of fast-growing startups, Ramp is a clear outlier. You started the company in 2019, grown incredibly quickly, raised almost $1 billion in financing, valued at $8.1 billion. That's in 3 years, right? That's a true outlier right there. I'm curious. You entered a space with a lot of competitors, and the common advice that I've heard in my time with startups is don't enter a heated space, don't enter a competitive space. So what was your thinking? What prompted the move into building something like Ramp?
It was always very funny to me. Like the biggest player in the corporate card space is American Express, and they started in the year 1850. I wasn't born with a top hat. I wasn't around a long time ago, and I thought, first, the market just never exhibited the behavior where it was winner takes all. It was much more of, even from the get-go, if you study it, there's always been large-scale players in different ways. Something unusual about the corporate card market too was, for most of the past 30, 40 years, if you were a bank, you were allowed to move money, you were allowed to store money, you could do bank-like things. And as the rest of the world passed by, went from no phone to flip phones to iPhones, all that technology was taking hold, your bank account was your bank account, your credit card was your credit card. It didn't change. My last company was focused on saving customers money in the same way Ramp sort of is today. And I just found it really bizarre. I interview customers and ask them, did you want more points? Did you want more cash back? And if you really listen, they would say, I actually wanted more in my bank account. And I just couldn't get this idea out of my head of why is it this product that we use basically every day is sort of designed against my interest and against customers' interest? Is it actually trying to get people to spend more money and more points? What if you could take this very age-old idea of, look, people do need to move money. Working capital for 30 days is great. Cash back is fine. But what if this product was designed not with the intention of getting me to spend more money, but actually to spend less? And so I think to your question of what got comfort with it, it felt like the status quo felt off from what felt long-term correct, long-term aligned, and there was a market opening. Suddenly, there could be companies like Ramp that within day 60 was doing transactions, whereas over the past 20, 30 years, the only way to compete was quite literally become a bank. And so it was the combination of those factors combined with it's never been winner take all. Felt like it was time to try.
How much time do you think founders at the early stages should spend thinking about things like this, the why now? Like, how much time did you really spend on it when you're thinking about this, the business? How much time do you think other early stage founders should spend time on it?
There's some people who are just great at doing like macro oriented. Like I think Jeff Bezos famously, it was like the internet is growing really fast. What business would work well? That can work for some people. And if you know enough about it, I'm sure it can work. I think I personally view it as more important as a check by and large of, I think personally the best ideas come from noticing real problems that you have. In our case, we knew a lot about savings. We talked to customers and they'd say, this product makes me worse off or less healthy. I wish this product made me healthier. And so we were struck by the incentives are misaligned. An observation out there in the world, it was possible to create credit cards are suddenly happening, and we're trying to figure out why. Is there something I'm missing? And so it really was trying to run down what's happening in the world that makes it unique. Because I'm a big believer too. You can actually study people who've tried things before. Often there's incredible learnings. There was some enormous spike if they were successful, and we're talking about them, something they were extremely good at, and maybe some gaps in that strategy, and you can use it to position kind of in the cracks. But I think this idea of looking at regulatory chain, all these different areas, probably is a more of in most, for most entrepreneurs, I think is a secondary thing. If you've got this idea, have the conditions change where you get a different output in an experiment, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. You touched on something really interesting there, which is digging in to learn from past tries at it, past experiments. How do you approach that process, right? Let's just say you have an idea, or you have a problem, more specifically, that you're looking to solve, and you see that there are a few other folks that have tried to solve it in the past. And I can think of many such companies. You have the Instacart and the web van. You literally have like every new thing that's worked now, people tried in the past. How do you approach something like that? Do you contact the founders of those companies, the executives of those past companies, and just pepper them with questions?
Super good question. So for me, a lot of it, what is helpful about fintech in general, try to broad it more broad, is anyone can actually look up a lot of the components of how a lot of financial service businesses, and this is particularly true for old businesses, work. You can go and you can read annual reports. You can go in through 10Ks. You can Google search Visa interchange rate table. You can see how it works. You can look at the cards on back. You can read up on policies. There's actually a lot you can really do, given the regulatory disclosure, the public nature of many of these companies, to start understanding in areas of where really you need multiple infrastructure partners going and saying, we're looking to build this is stuff. Can I get your advice? I think often the way that people approach this is I'm trying to do discovery. You can do that in independent research, but I think the way that if you want to get great advice from people, don't try to interrogate, ask them for advice, right? And so you might even go to people who are at these companies and ask them, like, why is it this way? If you were to build it today, what would you do differently? I've got this kind of plan. We're looking at working with these partners. Does this make sense to you? In trying to sit at the same side of the table, so to speak, and debug it, I think makes people much more interested in problem solving together. Maybe advising some of those people actually go into and may want to be on your team or support, but trying to problem solve together, I think is kind of the way to do it. If you want to get more interesting insights on some of this stuff.
That makes sense. And I was actually listening to a recent podcast you did. I think it was an Invest Like the Best. You talked about the early pre-product stage of Ramp, where you went and talked to 100 customers, if I remember correctly. Yes. And you had the same concept of ask for advice. You're problem solving together. So walk me through that. Is it 100 live conversations and it's a path to just absorbing as much of their problems as possible? Like, how did you approach that whole process?
Cool. Totally. Yeah. So around that time, we had already gotten onto okay, if we want to build a credit card designed to help people spend less, we started to think through, how do you build a credit card? How do you build core underwriting system? And we knew a little bit enough to get started. And so by the time we showed up, at the offices or in the email inboxes initially of some of these people, entrepreneurs we respected, love, looked up to, we said, look, we've got this. We're building a credit card that's designed to help companies spend less. We think that most companies spend about 5% more, some percent more than they need to. I would love to work for you for free and actually try to go and help find savings. And for most people, who could say no to that? Like it's very, it's like, sure, you want to work for free and tell me where I can cut costs, fine. And, we started, and people were very open. It was not, you can kind of tell when someone's trying to sell you something. And of course, hopefully we'd want to do that, but it was just, our whole premise was, let me show you value first. And it was incredible. You would learn a lot. Some people had unique issues that would cause them to overspend in their business, but often businesses are much more similar than they are different. Despite being in different industries. And we started seeing these repeated patterns in this was in kind of the go-go days of WeWork and Uber and just spend as quickly as possible. Blitzscale was a thing. And so we found over and over all these companies that were littered with SaaS, where often it was as simple as opening up the statements and seeing what was happening between departments to finding redundant spend. There was lots of continued patterns where people started on a monthly plan. Annual plans were a lot cheaper. We could see that. It was like a really simple heuristic. We started seeing a lot of price discrimination. We just asked people, how much are you paying for Salesforce? It varied, basically like clockwork. There was this rise of contact sales, and you would see this everywhere. And so after all these interviews, we said, okay, this is pretty interesting. First, if you had a card deployed, you could start to collect this data through the card transactions itself. It was enough to know what people were spending on, but if you really wanted to help people save, you'd want to see the receipts, whether it's after a transaction to facilitate a bill payment, you would have both of it. If you could go and build it was initially our first savings product was built in a weekend, just to kind of first automate the process of manually going through these transactions. Then it was code that stood on its own. But it was much more of a process of for these 10, 20, 50, 100 companies, how do we help them save? Some of them took the savings and said, thanks, see you later. Others said, okay, well, you saved me $50,000. I will use the card. We'll try it. And it helped us get off to the races, being actually sincere in trying to show value first and, collect more people. And those stories are powerful. Like the last thing I'd say in my rant here is like, people in B2B, I think I'd underestimate how much people will call other customers and ask them, and you really count on making your first 50, 100 people really, really happy, because those are the people that you need references. They know other entrepreneurs and other businesses at every level, whether they're founders or just they're members of the finance team, and they're calling other friends for advice. And if you were able to do things that were don't scale, but actually really help them, that transfers and was one of the core ingredients that led to Ramp's fast growth.
Yeah. That's actually that's really interesting that you approached it as, hey, I'd love your advice, and then here, let us do this for you. Like, we'll just deliver value.
Yeah.
And then as a follow-up, like, hey, if there was value, you want to use our product, right? That seems to be the trend, the pattern.
That's right. And a lot of it for us too was we were using it to figure out what was automatable, what could you productize over time. And it became a bit of a natural sale of like, look, we did this and you found this one time. But what if you could do this every week, of every month you had software that was really designed for that? And by the way, you're dealing with these lack of controls, we can build or with much more controls. You have accounting issues, let's automate some more of this. And so it became sort of what was initially us trying to do this for you to, could you design products that sort of touched where the, either the actual workflow was happening, where the data was stored, consolidate this together. And so over time you could go and say, look, in the same way people wear like an Oura Ring and Apple Watch, versus like an annual checkup, like you could, like annual checkups, I'm sure are fine. But being able to have this always on cleansing improvement, thing that's getting better and helping get more efficient, that is constantly upgrading, just feels better. It feels more modern. And so I think a lot of people saw the value.
Yeah, I'm gonna call Ramp the Aura for B2B spend management now. Yeah,
love it.
So what's interesting is sometimes when founders go talk to customers, they'll come back and they'll say, well, hey, they gave me a list of things that I should go build, right? But my feedback always is, well, they're just telling you to build a faster horse, right? So how do you step back from that? Because there is a fine line between just building everything someone wants versus solving a problem. So how do you approach that? What's your framework around that?
I love that she asked that, and even that phrase is like probably one of the most common tropes or things that people talk about in the product team of like, car not a faster horse. So I think a lot of it is, I think actually thinking a lot about TAM and like product market fit and saying no a lot has been like super key to ramping is growing as quickly as we have. Like, so something on the surface, a lot of times people say like ramp is optimized towards speed, and like we talk about it a lot, and it's an explicit design goal of iterating quickly. But part of what allowed us to do this was being really how to say, like deliberate and cutting a lot of things off and saying no to things. So as a small example, the paradigm in the industry pre-ramp was credit cards were in one world, and then you would port it over to Expensify or Concur. As we were doing design interviews with customers, initially we thought it was all about saving money, and we started meeting these companies that said, I can't close my books on time. It's really dysfunctional. My finance team are beating up on people. They're never getting expenses in. It takes about a month on average to get it. And so our view is, well, what if we could collapse that process? Swipe a card. Your expense policy is actually fused into it. So you could control your card with code. We could text you when the receipt is still in your hand rather than waiting a day later. And we could even use that data to automate your books and accounting. That works if you say no to Expensify and Concur. And early on, that actually dramatically reduced the TAM for us. There were lots of accountants who would say, what do you mean I'm not going to use Expensify or Concur? I've been using it for 20, 30 years. And all of the new entrants in the spend management category were delighted to build integrations with everybody. They built integrations with Concur, with Expensify, and the ongoing costs of that dragged them. Still they're maintaining multiple different versions and use cases and poor workflows. And initially we'd said, we're going to make this more opinionated design decision to actually replace it, because we think it is a better experience for users. It's going to feel more like a toy initially. Like smaller companies will be open to doing this, and maybe larger companies will say no. But as we start getting good enough, fast enough, automating about it, you could today, Ramp is known for fully replacing and displacing it. And I think what helped us get there was first, for a certain subset of customers, it was a much tighter pitch. They didn't want to spend $1,000 a year on Expensify. You could bring this down. It was faster. And then our belief was, if you got good at that fast enough, your card LTV was dramatically more than the LTV of an expense management one. You could use that to have an acquisition advantage, against other, let's say, folks in the market, and move faster. And so there's a product lens. There's also just being diligent about like feedback and trying to map it to TAM. Like every time, even from early on, if we would win a customer, if we would lose a customer, we would map out what are the needs and what's the revenue or spend associated. We go to every customer and figure out, okay, they're spending, maybe they didn't want to switch to us, but they're spending $50,000 a month on their cards, or they're spending $1 million a month. And we would start to see, both by number and in terms of by volume, what were the features at least they thought they wanted, that they asked for. And then we could try to cut through with this launch, what portion of it could we actually tackle, and then go back to and say, we solved that. We'd love to show it to you, get their input as get their advice again as a design partner, bring them on. And some would say, if you deliver this, I'll build it. Great. It'll be done in 2 weeks. Let's get you onboarded. And you could actually use that as a way of sort of slashing down by TAM. And if you talk to enough customers, that internal tally of volume you'd unlock could be a proxy to what is the market. And if you do things right, you're able to unlock more of the market, have a better design for a product, and sort of cross-solve it. So we try to look at both lenses. Last, just some, I don't think there's a perfect algorithm. It's probably just our gut using some taste. Sometimes we're right, other times we're wrong. But if you're moving and shipping pretty quickly, you'll be able to do it.
And how much of the product development process incorporates a question around TAM? Like, how do you incorporate it? Because sometimes when you're creating a product, it's like art, right? You're sort of like listening, internalizing the problems and going, well, this is what I think this should look like. And you show it to the world. Sometimes the world says, no, this is crap. But sometimes they love it. And so how much of that process also incorporates like, oh, let's take a look at the TAM at the same time? I'm curious.
Yeah, I love this question. So I think it's like it's an evolving thing. So early on, I actually think in the extremely earliest days, it's actually having like a product with like a modicum of usefulness is like kind of the art and the craft. For us is like, how do we make a card people would put in their pocket, so to speak, and like use. And we had this notion of, okay, we're trying to, maximize money and time savings. We had this view of if you could go end to end from issuing a card out to getting receipts and expenses to closing some transactions faster, let's do that. So we built like a very thin layer, and then we try to expand it into more card transactions, more, eventually payments, and go and take on larger TAM. So I would say explicitly the first is you have something in mind, but actually just make it useful for like 10 companies, 50 companies, like that's enough. I think the next overlay for us is, can you go and actually craft unique story and positioning? I'll come back to that. But crowded market, especially if you're moving second or the 300th entrant to a race or whatever we were, that's important. And then I actually think in the initial scale up phase, I think being super deliberate on actually what is the one variable, the output that you're trying to optimize against. Be really opinionated on it. For us, it was for a long time, it actually was purchase volume. And that was the right level of proxy where it was immediate. A customer could go out, could use it, swipe a card, put it somewhere online, and we could see it. We had multiple paths. You could get larger customers with more volume, fewer customers, more volume, or a large number with small, and it could add up to it. And there was degrees of freedom in the acquisition and the growth and the product development, but there was an explicitly of what can we develop, how do we grow, that with the least effort possible or the least time possible allows us to start to grow into that. The reason we were comfortable with that is it correlated to revenue pretty directly. It correlated to friction. People needed to account and close the books on all these volumes, and so it would be a good proxy for the rest. But actually, we made trade-offs very explicitly of what will, in the shortest duration, grow that. It's changed at this point. Now we're getting closer. We can start looking at revenue. We can look at contribution profit mix. We can look at actually starting to build into what are the next areas, more of time where a company is taking too long to close. And so it changes. But I think if you're zero for, through 200 people, actually trying to constrain the problem as much as you can so you can make these trade-offs, I think is probably the most important thing that early teams can do.
Yeah, you've said a word a few times. I'm going to dig into that a little bit. Opinionated, right? Having an opinion on how the world should work. I come across companies and startups all the time where it doesn't seem like there's any unique opinion, any different opinion. How important do you think is having a unique and different opinion of how the world should work to the success of a startup? And another way to ask the question is if as a founder, you don't have a unique view or unique opinion, should you really reconsider what you're doing? Or how would you approach that?
I love that. Like I think people, so one in general, yes, I think that you do 99% of startups. I think you got to remember a lot of this is like people don't have to work together on your team. I I think companies are a battle against people not giving a shit. Like people have got their families, their own stressors. They don't need to use your new product, right? And I think if you're going to ask people to have an extraordinary amount of focus, of work, of trying and struggling to build something new, it should serve some purpose in the end. And I think the companies, or at least what we've tried to model, is we are very opinionated if we have a clear purpose. Our purpose as a company is to help companies get more of their scarcest resources. It's their time and it's their shareholders' capital. We are explicitly here to serve customers and help them become much more efficient versions of themselves. How we get there, and it turns out what is causing companies to waste money, what's causing them to waste time, you can learn an incredible amount of that, and you can deviate and you can figure out what is the right path to get there. But why we exist and what we were trying globally to optimize against is very, very clear. And I think the combination of both is an amazing one. At one point, I think 30% of the headcount of Ramp were former entrepreneurs, former founders. And I think when you've got that, if this is the output that we're trying to drive to, you decide how we're going to get there, what products actually are causing people to save those money and time. You're going to get real creativity, different solutions, and one you could see, and the bigness of mission combined with flexibility is exciting. And you can get people to really be invested in work in a very different way. So I think it's important. Sometimes where I think people go wrong on the opinionated fact is it becomes like a micromanaging, controlling aspect of not only my opinionated, but I know exactly how the world should work, and that becomes delusion. And so I think it's a careful balance of I do think people should have feelings of, look, I believe this. You could be right or wrong, but the world is not at its end state. It can be better in X ways, and here's what we exist to do. You can have kind of strong opinions loosely held about the best path to get there, and then using the input, you can go and build more different. But I actually think opinionated products are in the context of the world as busy and distracted and as competitive as it can be. I think it's a must. I really do, and I love that you pushed in on it.
And then how do you actually transfer context? Sounds like what you're saying is you've set the purpose of the company, the vision of the company, and then you're transferring context to the team that can then make those opinionated decisions. Now, each person will have their own context, of course, as they're coming into Ramp. So how do you communicate that context? What are some frameworks or rituals you have inside the company that help you scale yourself? Because when the product was just you or your founders, much easier, right? Because you were just building it. Now, as you're several hundred people, how do you actually make sure that the team has a context they need to have their opinions that are also mostly correct opinions, of course?
We're definitely not perfect. We've done some stupid things, but so let's stack some of these things up that I think that we're themes that you're talking about. So first, we have this idea of constraints and different kind of arcs. Early on, it might be we got to get a product to launch. Maybe that's to a launch day, and this is the spec, and we would almost pre-write, okay, on launch day in 4 months, we're going to have a first card design to help you spend less. Maybe we want to have and some of the fastest growing companies in New York are using it. Here's the output if we help you save 2.5% on all your transactions. And so we say, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Here's the timeline. Good plan. Not enough time. How are we going to go and get there? And so early on, it's just this sort of alignment around this is the output we're trying to hit. You have freedom and controls over the inputs to go and do that. Let's kind of crap back. We've got 10 sprints, whatever the cycles. Let's map out in order to get there what needs to happen over what time horizon. And you can be if you need to move the data a little bit, you can. But sort of driving alignment and agreement, it might initially be around a narrative and a story in a first launch. Later, let's say, okay, we want to go and grow purchase volume, we might say, we want to grow 25% per month for the next 4 months. And so we hope to, there was, we launched in Feb 2020, and our goal was by April 30th of 2020 that we would do 10 million a month in volume. We had a TV, we put up a redash panel, and we would kind of go and track and see, could you actually go and hit this kind of mark? You have kind of, okay, here's the output, here's the, we could agree and align on what were the inputs, the things that mattered. We broke it down into a few cycles, sprint cycles. We would try to think about the inputs that would do it faster, claims of savings, talking to more customers, and then just make it a systems of equations and hit go. Is generally trying to deconstruct the problem is I would say the heart of it. There are things though, and I think more broadly related to your question of how do you set common context that I think are super key. I think getting to the clarity of like, what is the mission and vision, and talking about that very often is super important. Like even today, it's day 1324 at the company. I've been around for a long time, and like I will still do onboarding with everyone who comes into the company. And during that onboarding, we talk the mission vision. We ask people what brought people. We clarify what's the the purpose. What are we aligned as a company to do? And then we go through early board decks. We actually say these were the decisions patterns that we made in the get-go. We share early metrics, and it was not to say, hey, look, study the early history, the early context. It's more to say these were the decisions that we made at the time. Some of these decisions no longer apply. The world has changed in some ways, context has evolved. I want you to have a critical view so you feel comfortable rewriting it, knowing kind of our mission of where we're trying to get to, this vision. What was the path that took us there? Here's how we organize, go out and let's do it. So those are some of those things. But I actually think to your point, thinking about inputs, outputs, rituals, what you do regularly, so that people, once those are set, you've got the structure, people are able to be creative, go and attack a problem in their own way. If you get that right, a lot of the rest follows.
And you mentioned having an output, deconstructing into a formula and a system almost, and putting that up on the screen. Was that an early ritual that you still have to date? And is it a single formula for like all teams, or just folks, or a single output that all teams are looking at?
Our first outside board member was Keith Verboy at Founders Fund, and one of the things that he advocates for and was deeply impactful was at the first board meeting, we wrote out what was the business equation of Ramp. How does the business actually work? What are the inputs that drive to, okay, net revenue? And if you broke it down and you really simplified it, it wasn't that many, actually, where you could see, okay, purchase volume times the interchange rate, less let's say the funding costs, less the rewards costs, all that might lead to your contribution profit, right? And so everyone is trying to go and maximize this thing at the end. And the question is, what actually drives it? So first, trying to break it down into the business allowed people to have a much cleaner way of thinking about the business. You're coming in, you could say, okay, if I just keep these 4 things in mind, I kind of know what matters. But then you started thinking about how they interrelate, and something pretty interesting happened in our business equation. Purchase volume, if that goes up, that's obvious that grows, revenue and profit. But if you look at interchange, there was something bizarre of the more volume we did, the more interchange we make. So to maximize interchange, we would maximize purchase volume. To funding cost, if you wanted to borrow $100 million for your card receivables versus 10, you would get charged a lower interest rate. And so in a strange way, to minimize your funding costs, you would want to maximize your purchase volume. And you started tracing these things through, and it actually gave you the intuition to say, okay, if we want to grow this early on, the reason why we're trying to maximize purchase volume is it made every part of the business better. And so then it became, in order to do that, what would do that? Okay, well, talking to more people, clearer message, saving people money and time, differentiated value are the inputs that would go to maximizing that. And so it really simplified a lot of our core business, early on. And so I actually think for most people just getting started, at some point thinking about how does the business really work and what are the natural incentives for your business, and how do you articulate that and then align your company behind it. It makes things a lot easier. And so, some people say, like, doesn't it feel silly to write a business equation? And I actually think it really doesn't. Most businesses actually are quite simple if you take the time to really simplify it down, and doing that clarifies a lot of your own thinking and team's time.
And then do you have a dashboard that has that formula that's constantly updating with the inputs and the outputs, and people can see the weights and the sensitivity? You have that?
Exactly, we do. And we manage, we look at the outputs, but we manage almost entirely to the inputs. And so there's some months where the outputs are incredible, it's growing super fast, and people are banging their head against the wall because the early and the leading indicators, the results in 3 months are going to be different. And and inversely, it's the other way. Sometimes people are over the moon, even though we're having a slow month, because we kind of know and have done that. And I think if you do things in that way, you're able to have much more traction, input, sense of what's actually driving your business. And then you can, it also gives you the space to stop working on things that don't actually, the inputs that don't matter. I would say for me, and I think, for some people, entrepreneurship is their first job. For most, they've had, they worked in some other company or some corporate setting. And I think in most jobs in the world, success is directly related to how many hours you work. And it turns out in the real world and in startups, it doesn't actually work that way. And so being able to, one, unlearn that, but two, actually start thinking about there are simply some things that are 10 times as effective, and you won't know unless you're deliberate about kind of trying to understand the connection between input and output. So tuning that way, I think, is good.
Yeah. Yep. Makes total sense. Jumping to a related but slightly different topic, you touched on how to position the product earlier, very briefly. I'm curious if there's one thing you'd want to share with an early stage founder or someone that's looking to just launch their product. What is it around positioning, marketing, whatever you want to call it? I'm curious about what advice you would give them.
Yeah, I think this stuff is to me, it was totally foreign, right? What I'd say to anyone is you don't need to be someone who's came up or studied marketing to learn this stuff. My very first job back in the day was or out of college was in bankruptcy restructuring banking, right? And the bent of people there was, don't talk to anybody. You don't even tell your families, the media, about what's going on. And so if you can kind of come from that to thinking about how to work, and I actually love now a lot of thinking about how to tell a good story. I think this stuff is all very learnable. Is the first. I would say the second. I would say the general framework that people have with regard to, is you sort of think about and obsess of all the reasons that you build things, all the value props, all the factors that led you to develop it. And often people go out with messaging to people of I've got this product, I want you to understand stuff. And how do I find people who want to write that? And most people don't. It turns out I think self-respecting journalists are there to cover news. And I would argue a lot of the better way to do it is invert it and sort of study actually what do people write about, why, what are they interested in. Take that one as a factor. The next, look at what else is out in the world, before branding Ramp, before sort of getting at some of we sort of deeply believe cards and financial products should help people spend less. We even started looking visually Like, what were all the colors that other people were using? What were the languages? What were the points programs? And trying to find, if you spend enough time with it, there are exercises you can go through of actually trying to figure out what was the white space. And it just like jumped out to us after, took a few weeks, but you get there and we saw there was this issue where most of how these companies over time would make money and how they grew their margin was kind of tricking people. They would say, enjoy 4x points here, or this early sign-up bonus, or 7x on that, 3x there. But if you actually looked at their financial statements, they were only spending like 0.9%, 1%, that kind of thing. And so there was a mismatch between what they're pitching. And actually over time, you had really brilliant people acting against their customers' best interests. And so we said, let's eat the cost, actually. And trying to first align our business. But if you could start to both from find the white space, but even deposition and tell a story of, look, every product that you're doing is actually giving your employees a bit of a subtly wrong incentive. Not only does it help you stand out on that day, you find people who are interested in some of these David versus, Goliath stories, people who are interested in something different and new, but actually it's enduring. It goes into your sales narrative. It goes into your product ethos. You start thinking about, if it's opposite day and we're trying to help you spend less, what more, how would you do it? And I think there's lots of industries like this, where the incentive set, the ability, especially in industries that are hard to compete, often the idea of alignment with customers is an afterthought. So I think that's a huge theme. But sort of just taking a time to think about how can you have X versus Y. The press also loves these narratives of like, Uber versus Lyft, Apple versus Microsoft, like name your company. And if you can actually break through, like we were a big beneficiary of that, because even when we were a tiny startup, we were getting attached to in headlines with some of the new players in the space. And so every time they would go out and write a story, and we would show up as an alternative. And because we showed up, you could have a different perspective. And so actually even trying to think about, I think since people are scared of markets where there's a big first mover, we just started seeing this over and over, where sometimes other people being into it and actually leaning into that became a huge accelerant. You could kind of grab onto it and then slingshot yourself. I think the main key and danger is making sure you don't grab onto and just get stuck on it, like using it slingshot and then differentiate more and more over time. As long as you have both, you'll be okay.
And how much of that that strategy was a conscious counter positioning strategy versus a different type of strategy, like grabbing onto an existing player in the market? I'm curious, like, was that something that you had sort of explored going into it, or it was something that evolved as you started thinking about ways in which to market and position the company?
So it's a super good question. It came from a couple of things. I mean, one, like there was a bit of a different worldview at the start, but we went from like day 5 at the company, and we started like trying to recruit friends or different investors. They're like, well, what about X or Y? Aren't they already doing this? And I actually think a lot of people's natural mental state is to say like, won't competition kill you? And I think that's very rare that actually happens. But I think it forced us to start thinking about early on is like, what is actually different about this thing? Why is this worthwhile? To think a little bit both of like, okay, there's some goodness there. There is something that this other company is very good at. How do we learn and appreciate that? And also, if we're lucky enough one day to become a problem in the market, assume they're going to be super smart and come at us with everything they've got. So understand that, but also too, thinking about what is uniquely us, I think was important. I think the later thoughts of actually, when you sort of think about the tactics of going and telling the story of X versus Y, you could be explicitly of like, oh, well, who covered these other companies? That might be a proxy. In some ways, they've sort of done some of the work, and there's market signals that you can actually pull. You can either do basic research, or you can say who are all the people that like just do a bunch of Google searches, and so it can speed you up in a lot of ways and actually save a lot of certain work. But I think that's more tactical and more narrow. Yeah. Like it's not, I think, going to make a long-term difference to the company is my general take, but it'll help in the short run.
Got it. Cool. I'd love to end on a note around product market fit. If there was one thing I could communicate to all founders I talk to, is just what product market fit actually is and what it feels like. I personally have spent a lot of time in past companies not knowing it, and I spent a lot of time, a lot of wasted time. So I'm curious, in your words, how did you know, like, when Ramp had product market fit? What does it actually mean to you? What does it feel like? If you want to talk a little bit about that.
I love that you asked it too. And for me, like I in previous companies, I've had it and I've lost it, and gained it back again. And it is first, like I can't underpin of like how much you really can know it when you feel it. And I think having real checks and constraints and stop points in your business to figure that out is the important between like finding and sprinting at something versus wandering in the desert. And so for us, a lot of the first phase of product market fit was like a modicum of usefulness of like, could you actually make something that, okay, we've got this design goal of we want to have a card, it saves you some time and money. So could we actually accomplish that? Could we have 10 businesses that are using the card with some regularity? Maybe it becomes their core thing. We knew that. They could close their books. They could, we could go and ask them, either we could go and deliver the savings manually, or they could say like, actually, yes, we are better off for having used this. I'm going to use it and recommend it. That was it.
Awesome. Well, I could actually talk on many other topics. You touched on a few other ones. I want to dig into constraints and all of that, but we are out of time, and I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you, Eric. I think founders are going to find this extremely valuable and insightful. Thanks again for the time.
Hope it's useful, and thanks for the opportunity. And very excited.
Cool.